So, good evening to everyone and welcome to Pewter Live 2021. I'm Chris Hudson, the 584th Master of the Worshipful Company of Pewters, and we're delighted that you've decided to join us this evening and attend Pewter Live 2021, which is the company's flagship event organised to promote the use of pewter and to encourage innovation in design. 2021 marks the 33rd anniversary of this competition, but it's the first online exhibition in its history. Pewter Live has opened its digital doors this morning, making the annual 3-day physical event more accessible to more people from around the UK and internationally, ensuring that our exhibitors have this vital platform to encourage the recovery of all their businesses. The theme of this year's competition is the Roaring Twenties, and the interpretation of this concept was entirely down to the entrants' inspiration and creativity. A tremendous effort and enthusiasm has gone into both the students and open competition. So we hope you will enjoy visiting the competition page and learning about the stories behind each piece. In 2021, Pewter Live brings together a diverse expertise in an exciting program of daily talks, opening up new avenues of education and conversation. A selection of established designers, university students, and talented pewter smiths will explore a variety of themes on a series of panel discussions, interrogating the qualities of different techniques and pewter's appeal to contemporary consumers of all ages and tastes. Zoom links to access the sessions are available on the Pewter Live website. It has never been more important for us to promote and showcase the skills and techniques of our craft and trade. We hope you will join us in support of our vibrant and creative industry by visiting the website and purchasing some of the unique products that are exclusively available to our online visitors. We hope that you will genuinely enjoy this evening. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
And now I pass you on to our Chairman of the PPC, which is the Pewter Promotion Committee, Isabel Martinson.
Thank you, Master, and thank you all so much for joining us today. It's really super to see so many faces, and a very warm welcome to Pewter Live 2021. Now, just before we start, I'm going to give you a little technical tip I've just been given. If you're having any problems with lots of people on the Zoom at the moment, and you get any wobbles, then if you turn your video off by just pressing the stop video, that might help you. I just understand that when people start coming home and everybody else starts using the bandwidth, sometimes they can go a bit wrong. So I'll just give you that little bit of a tip before we start. So our first event today will give you a really fascinating insight into the work of one of our wonderfully creative pewtersmiths, Fleur Grenier, as she demonstrates her work and give you a tour of her studio. In the last 5 minutes of this session, she will answer a few questions. And so can I ask you, please, to put any questions that you might have to our assistant clerk, Elisa Franco. She's on there as Elisa, assistant clerk. And if you can put your questions on the chat box, she will then pick that up and pass them to me to ask the questions of Fleur. So just a few words about Fleur herself. She's been a pewtersmith for over 20 years, combining traditional skills with modern design to create contemporary pewterware, as well as bespoke commissions and sculptures. A freeman of the Worshipful Company of Pewterers, Fleur studied at the Royal College of Art in London, and she works from her studio in West Sussex. She has two distinct elements to her work. Her homeware collection, Maris, includes tableware and giftware. She also works to commission and runs pewter workshops. She is also a sculptor, and her current series of work is Home, where she explores what home is and uses pewter and cast concrete in these pieces. So, Fleur, delighted to welcome you. I'm going to hand over to Fleur now.
Hello, and thank you very much, Isabel. And thank you everyone for joining me this evening for this first live session. As Isabel said, I'm Fleur, and I work as a pewter smith, and have been saying I've been working as a pewter smith for probably the last 20, well, I've been saying 20 years, but actually I've realised it's just under 30 years now. So it was a bit of a shock, but there we are. I was first introduced to pewter while I was working on it when I was studying my degree at the Sir John Cass in London. I'm sorry, I'm just going to, I think I may have, I've got my, speaking of this, I've got mine on the wrong view. I'm just going to switch that over after that, sorry. but just adjust that. Yes, oh, sorry, I was at Sir John Cass in London, and then I was introduced to a project using pewter during my second year. And I absolutely loved it. I just fell in love with it. It was such a lovely material to work with. There were so many different techniques and processes that you could use with it. And it just had that warmth to it as a material when you were handling it, and a nice weight to it as well when you were making pieces. And I ended up finishing my degree, and my whole degree show was actually made in pewter. And following my degree, I was, as Isabel said, I was really fortunate to be able to go offered a place at the Royal College of Art, where again, it gave me the opportunity to develop my skills and also develop my personal style of my work. And then I've continued to work in pewter ever since. And then I've now, obviously, my studio here, as you can see, Metal Studios. I don't know, Elisa, sorry, I seem to be quite small on my screen. Is there a way of making it bigger? Because I can't see where the camera's focusing. I've got Isabel on full screen.
So everyone should put their the screen view, the gallery view, as the speaker view, and that's how they will see you bigger.
Right, okay, sorry.
Switch to everyone. So please make sure you switch your view to speaker view to see Fleur presentation. And you should do the same if you switch.
Yes, sorry, I am sorry about that. It just seems to be
fine. So whoever has a laptop and is connecting via a laptop, if you go to the top right hand side, you have a button that says view. If you click there, it says speaker view. If you click on speaker view, you'll be able to see Fleur in your screen and follow it closer.
Yeah, so it's just at the moment I'm not seeing speaker view.
No,
that's fine. So, okay, sorry about that. So as I was saying, sorry, I'm here in my studio, Metal Studios, which is in Angmering, West Sussex, and I've been here now for 15 years. And it's a lovely place to work. I share in the studio next door to me. There I have there's a glass lamp worker called Elizabeth Welch. And the workshop building next door to that, there is a furniture maker, Brendan Devitt Spooner. So it feels like it's a really creative place to come to work every day. You can see behind me sort of my workshop here, and I can see, if you see, it's all divided into various areas. So you can see here, I have my general working bench where I do all my drawings, and assembling pieces, and then I have all my hammers behind me. And then just next to there we have my fly press. The fly press I use for when I'm making pieces such as this vase. So you can see here. So the fly press itself, I actually I make formers like these in perspex in wood, and these are positioned under the central column within the fly press, and then a piece of rubber is put over the top, which then stamps a really it gives it that lovely soft curve when we're actually working. So you can see how that it creates that lovely soft curve. And also I use it for pieces like this tray, which I use it for stamping out the base. Beyond the fly press, I've got my casting area. So you can see my centrifuge and the melting pot. and then my general bench for where I pour the pewter. I then also, at the end, I have my 2 benches where I do my teaching. So I run courses, and that's where the students tend to work there. Next to there, we have the soldering hearth. And next to there is my shelving, which has all my molds in there. So there are molds going back there years. And some of them, for instance, this week I had a lady contact me, and she wants to, she has some pieces from a previous collection that I've done, and she wanted to add to them. So I know that somewhere in that mold, in those boxes, there will be the right mold for those egg holders, which in particular she wanted. But it's just a matter of whether those shelves will be as tidy once I've finished. Next to the shelving, I use probably slightly hidden, but I have a room just off there going into my polishing room, which is where my bench polisher is. And that, because it's quite a dusty, dirty process, I like to keep that all separate. And then I have my guillotine, and this is my general working bench just here. So this is where I do all the forming for my pieces. So you can see here, there's a lot of the formers tend to be in wood and steel. I tend to use wooden formers rather than steel because the pewter is so soft, it can mark the pewter quite easily. So it's good to work with such a wooden hammer over the wooden forms so it doesn't mark the pewter too much. And then things like the rubber and rawhide mallets and nylon mallets as well, so they don't damage the pieces, so it's less cleaning up when you're finished at the end. There are not many of us pewter smiths, and so it's quite often an undervalued material. I think most people own a piece of pewter. It could be a tankard or a coffee set that their grandmother had given them, and usually they've got quite a dull grey finish. And this is what people have, this preconceived idea of that's what pewter is. And when the old pewter, it's beautiful for that. It does work really well. But for me, because of the contemporary nature of my work, I really want that shiny surface, because the reflections is really important to me within the pieces. It really adds to the work. When you look around, you can obviously see I have lots of equipment. I mean, this is what I've built up over years of working with it. But it's actually very easy to produce very beautiful pieces with minimal equipment. You can do it with just a small ladle and a torch. When I was a student, my flatmate and I decided we were going to try to make a bit more money, and we started casting pewter jewellery into plaster moulds using the cooker to melt the pewter, which at the time we were living in a rented flat, so I don't think the landlord would have really been very keen, but it was a good way to make some more money on the side. It's just to talk now a bit about as Isabel mentioned, my work is divided into various elements, and my homeware, which is one aspect of my work, and that's collection of work is called Maris. And as I said, I live very close. I live in West Sussex, and I'm very close to the beach. So this is quite often an influence on my work, which is how the Maris range is developed. And I usually start by doing drawings of the seaweed, and then they'll develop into quite big. I could work with charcoal and then start to refine them. But you can see here. So these pieces, I start to work quite loosely in pencil, and then shapes start to emerge, and it becomes a little bit more refined, so that you can see, until finally I will produce an actual product. I can go through 20, 30 drawings like this when I'm working, because it might be just refining a simple line that I need to get right. So you keep going over and over until I get the right line with that work. And you can see here some of the pieces. So this piece here, it's a candelabra which I've designed. There's there's very rarely straight lines in my work. You can see here it's very fluid. It's capturing that sort of fluidity and movement is a very strong element within my work. And I want people, when they buy my work, for them to enjoy using the pieces. I often describe them as, it's a sculptural homework, because I think of them as mini sculptures in their own right. So they become intriguing focal points on the table or on your desk. And things like this serviette holder. So they become, whether they're in use or not in use, they're actually lovely objects to look at. You want to, they enhance the table or your room. The other element to my work is my sculptural work. And this gives me the opportunity to explore working with other materials. I love the challenge of learning new skills. And in the past, I've worked with ceramic, wood, glass blowing, and the current range of work that I'm producing, series of work that I'm making for the sculptures, is using cast concrete. And using these different materials, it enables me to work in a different way, but pewter is always at the heart of the work. So the materials that I use always enhance the pewter. They always work nicely. They always work together. And so in the past, I've made things sort of like a cheese board and knife, and the cheese board would be made in a walnut, because that dark walnut wood complements the pewter. I've also used slate, because the Welsh slate in particular, that lovely, beautiful colour of it, it works well with the pewter. The other object that I do with using it is it can sometimes enable me to work on a larger scale, like it has done with the concrete. The concrete pieces that I've been working on. So at the moment, the series I'm currently working on is called Home. And it's exploring what home is. It's what it means to us. It's that feeling of feeling safe, comfortable, part of a community. It's not necessarily looking at it as just being a house with bricks. So, like, for example, a few years ago, I was actually working on a voluntary conservation project in the Amazon rainforest. And there was a line of leafcutter ants marching across the floor, and they were all carrying these pieces of leaves and petals, and they were all this dancing line of colours marching back to their nest to take the food back home to feed the rest of the colony. And that photograph I had of that piece inspired this piece that you can see here. So you can see the pewter is set into the concrete, but the idea is that this has got the flat back on it. And the idea is it can sit up against the wall, so it looks like the ants are actually marching back into their nest. So you can see this one here has actually got the leaf that it's taking back in. And then there's another one just on the top, which is on its way back out. So it's going back out to find forage for food again. And with this, I actually made a line of individual ants as well. So there's 9 separate ants to go with this piece. And they actually, so you can position them. So if it's on a mantelpiece or a shelf, you can position them all so they look like they're marching back into the nest. I didn't think about the weight when I was designing these pieces and carrying them around. That's the only issue. The current, the piece I've actually finished last week, like everybody else, spent a lot of time at home last year, and last March in particular. Being in the garden a lot, I was able to watch the frog spawn in our pond as it developed. And it started as it developed, and the marsh marigold plant grew above it. So it had these beautiful yellow flowers and large leaves. And that inspired this piece, which it's a little bit heavier, but I'll just try and lift that up for you. But so you can see here, the actual frog spawn itself is made in glass. So I commissioned Lizzie to make the glass, which I've then set into the pewter. So the idea was that the pewter, it creates that ripple effect around the glass that you get it when the frog spawns in the water, and it creates that shiny clarity that you normally get with the frog spawn. You can see. And then that's set into the concrete, and then the leaves and petals and flowers are all again made in pewter. And one of the things I also do is I teach, as I was saying, I run workshops. And I love running the workshops. There's nothing more satisfying than at the end of the day is seeing a student walking home with a piece of pewter that they've made from start to finish themselves proudly. Even when you get messages in the evening of them showing pictures of them using the piece. It's very important to me, this passing on these traditional skills. It's a big part of what I do. It's whether it's through talks like this or through demonstrations and my workshops, which is why I was really thrilled when I was asked several years ago to write a book on pewter, which is the one just here. And it's a simple book. It was designed really so that it explored a variety of different techniques that you can use with pewter, and there's also some exercises in it as well, so that people can go away and know and understand a bit more about it. But, yeah. I also work to commission, and one of my recent commissions was to design a crozier for the Bishop of Stepney. This was a lovely project for me to do. Joanne Grenfell, who is the bishop, she actually approached me with a series of images of a kingfisher, and she also gave me a poem, and also a picture of some jewellery that she had that had a distinctive textured finish on it, which she wanted to all of these actually to be incorporated into the design. So you can see this is how I came up with this design here, and so that's made in pewter, and also the actual kingfisher itself is made in anodized aluminium. So the idea with the aluminium was to create that iridescence of the kingfisher, and also it helped with the light to reduce some of the weight of the piece, because obviously she's carrying that down when she's doing a service, and now she's actually proudly using this piece. I don't know if we have a picture of her actually using. Yes. I mean, that was really doing that as well. That the other consideration with that piece was actually the fact that obviously it's got to be viewed from both sides. So it's not just being seen from one angle. So it had to look beautiful all around so that everybody in the congregation could see the piece. So, yeah. As you can see from all of these things that I've been showing you, there's so many different techniques and processes that you can use with pewter. But one in particular that I really enjoy is casting. Pewter has a low melting temperature in comparison to other metals. It starts to melt at 220 degrees, but I work with it between 290, 300 for the casting. But because it's this low temperature, it means that you can pour it straight into a silicon rubber mold. So it's a bit like the silicon cake molds that you can buy, a more sophisticated version of it though, obviously. So when you're doing the casting, you initially need to have your pattern, which you're going to start with. So your pattern the pattern is the actual what you want to have reproduced in the pewter. So I tend to carve my patterns in wax and milliput. It's a very hard wax, this one, so it means that you can get a really smooth finish on it. So it's because the thing when you're making your pattern, you have to consider the fact that when you're making your mold, if there's a slight scratch in this piece, that you make your mold, every casting that you make from that will also have that scratch in it, and then you'll be cleaning that casting up afterwards. So it's really important to spend time actually working on the pattern and getting that as perfect as you possibly can. And when you have your actual pattern, you then need to make your Lego wall. So it's an opportunity to have a play. The Lego wall helps to keep the rubber contained. So the rubber, it's liquid form when it's poured. So I set the pattern into it's called Chevant. It's like an oil-based clay, so it doesn't dry. And you can set that, and then you pour the rubber over the top, which then over a period of a few hours cures. And then you peel back the rubber, and then you can spray it with a release spray, so that then you can flip it over, peel back the Chevant, and you pour your second half of the mould. And you're then left with your sort of 2-part mould ready to pour the pewter into. The other type of mould that we have with the, that's called gravity casting, when you're pouring straight into a rubber mould like that. The other type of rubber mould that we use is a centrifuge. So you can see this is a 2-part mould, which this is good for creating multiples of an object. Or if you're wanting something that's very fine and delicate, that sometimes when it's been poured into the rubber, if it's gravity cast, it won't fill the cavity. So using the centrifuge, because it's actually spinning around as the pewter's being poured in, it forces the pewter to the very tips of the mould. So you can get very fine, delicate, and also multiples of an object with that one. There's also you can also make plaster moulds. Plaster moulds are good if you're making bigger objects, but they obviously don't have the flexibility that you have with the silicone rubber. They're very rigid, and so you can't actually have any undercuts or anything when you're working with those. And you also, one of the main things you need to consider is that to be aware of is that to make sure the mould is completely dry, because if there's any moisture in the mould and the pewter's poured in, it will explode. And you only tend to do it once. And yes, I have done it once, and it was quite a loud bang. Don't do it again. We won't do it again. But there's another method, which is cuttlefish casting. So many cuttlefish are what you find on the beach. So they you usually use them for your budgies. But for casting, pewter casting, it's perfect because because it's a soft bone, you can actually carve into it. So you can create patterns within it that you can then pour the pewter into. And one of the things with the pewter casting when you do that is that it creates this lovely texture on the back. So it picks up the detail of the actual bone. So that's that's when I was saying about not needing much equipment, that's a very quick and simple process to do. You can use the cuttlefish bone, a ladle and a torch, and you can create very simple detailed castings straight from there. I think this is probably a good point to go on to the demonstration that I was going to talk about, that I was going to do. So I'm going to be demonstrating here the gravity casting and centrifugal casting. So you see here I've got the 2 halves of the mould, which are then talc is put onto it. So the talc is put onto the mould to help the pewter to flow around the mould. It enables the pewter to flow smoothly, and then to, when the casting's done, to release from the mould. I think I might be getting a bit of a delay, but yeah. It's actually then positioned between 2 pieces of wood and clamped, and the clamps actually hold the pewter, hold the mould in place. You have to be aware not to clamp it too tightly, because if it's too tight, it creates an impression in the mould, which then causes a problem that the casting has lab dents in it as well. You then need to scrape the surface of the pewter, because it creates like a dross on the surface, which you don't want to go into your casting. The pewter's then poured into the mould using the ladle, ensuring the ladle is really hot, because you don't want the pewter cooling as you're pouring it into the mould. And you need to do this quite quickly. You don't want it to cool, the temperature to move away too far from what it was when it was in the melting pot. It takes because it's a low temperature metal, it cools very quickly. It's quite it can be minutes in comparison to other metals. That's very, that's very quickly. And once it has cooled, you can then just release it from your mould. So unscrewing the clamps and then removing the wood. It will still be quite warm, so you just need to be careful when you're handling it. But then you can see you've got your actual casting coming out of the mould. This obviously needs to be then cleaned up, the sprues removed, and then any filing and polishing will need to be done. The second method which we were going to talk about was the centrifugal casting. And that's, the setup is the same, except this time it's positioned between two steel plates, and the steel plates are then secured in place around the rubber, and it's then put into the centrifuge, which once the lid is closed, it spins around as the pewters, and then you pour the pewter in as it's actually spinning. So you can see here, again, you need to clean the surface of the pewter, because you don't want any of those, the dross in it, creating imperfections in your casting, and ensuring that the ladle is really hot. And this is where you have to be very precise with the pouring, because you have a small hole in the centre of the two steel plates, which you need to pour it into. And you can see here it's actually rotating as you open the lid. So that's the force of that is pushing the pewter out into the cavities within the mould. So then, again, the idea with this is it's removing the thread, the nut, sorry, to actually release the casting inside. It can sometimes, this is where you have to be careful that you make sure you get the aim correctly, because if it runs over the top of the mould, then you have issues trying to remove it. But you can see here that the castings have all come out. And with this one, this is what I was saying about it needs to be very, this wouldn't necessarily work with the gravity casting, because it's such a fine and long, thin pieces. It really needs the centrifugal force to push it out into the tips of all of the branches. Okay. So you can see those pieces that were being cast. So one of the pieces was this element just here, which now I have this casting, I would cut off all of the sprues, which are the sprues are these pieces just here where you pour the pewter in, and it would then be filed and polished. And that piece is actually what I make for these vases. So you can see here, that's the central piece just here, and then I have to form the basing sheet. And then Lizzie, who's in the studio next door, makes the glass tube for it, which holds the bud. So you can see and then the centrifugal pieces that were cast. So you can see here, there's actually 4 elements on this piece. So this is what I was saying about creating multiples. So this one's actually a hanging pewter mistletoe, which it's the piece just here. So each pewter mistletoe is actually 2 elements. So within this casting, I've actually got 2 mistletoe, and they're removed from the from the sprues, which are then cut off, and it's then filed and polished and then soldered together, and then you've got your actual hanging mistletoe. One thing with the pewter as well, which especially at the moment where we're very aware of the environment and waste, any of the offcuts that come off the pewter, such as the central part just here, the sprue, or any castings that happen to go wrong, can be put straight back in the pot. It can all be remelted and reused. So it gives you that, in a way, it gives you that freedom with the piece, that you can be brave with it when you're working with it, and actually, because if it goes wrong, it just goes back in the pot and it's remelted. And I think that's probably a good point to stop now. I don't know, do we have any questions?
We do, Fleur. Thank you so much. I've seen people clapping. That was just amazing. And I have got some questions, but I would just say that to the audience, I now understand how you can make such beautifully delicate objects. I've got a number of Fleur's pieces. In fact, I even commissioned you to make a piece for my brother for his wedding.
Yeah.
And it was really, really delicate. So really fantastic. And somebody has already mentioned about the fact that that would make a wonderful tea light holder, when that's in effect what you did for me that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a couple of, a few questions flying in. So first of all, I think you've already mentioned, but can you just remind the audience how hot you have to get the pewter to start working with it?
It actually melts. It starts to melt at 220 degrees, which is why we were able to do it on that cooker in our rented flat. but to get good castings, I usually cast between 290, 300 degrees. So that's when you get a really nice casting, a good surface finish on the metal as well. But if you're doing it in a if you do it in a ladle, you can, obviously I've got the thermometer on mine, but you can usually start to get a feel of when it's ready for pouring. So you can, once you've done it a few times, it does become obvious.
Brilliant. Somebody asked, are the ants for sale? I think you've almost indicated that they are somewhere.
The sculptural pieces, the ants, it's all one piece. I've not been doing them separately. It's all one they're all one-off pieces, the sculptural pieces. So yeah, it all comes as a package as such. Yeah, it's all one piece.
Okay. And somebody said they had a question that was naive, but it's not at all, is where do you get your pewter from, and can you actually make your own? So I've never tried making my own. I use the Pewter Sheet Company in Birmingham, which are a small family firm. It's a father and his two daughters that run it, actually, and I've actually bought from them ever since I was at uni, so nearly 30 years. So yeah, and they're very, very helpful if you're ever having a problem. I think most of the sort of smaller pewter smiths that I know tend to use them as well. Brilliant, thank you. Somebody's asked about how do you polish pewter. Actually, I get asked this question all the time. How do you clean pewter? How do you polish pewter?
The old pewter, it's just soapy water and a soft cloth, because it's a lot of some of the old pewter will have lead in it. So and it's recommended not to use anything harder on them. With the modern pewter, obviously it's lead free, and again it's just soapy water and a soft cloth, but you can use something like a silver polishing cloth or something like, because especially with my clocks and things, like don't want to be putting them in water. But yeah, it's very difficult, the old pewter, because you don't want to damage, because it's that patina what makes it that beautiful colour as well with the old pieces.
Okay, there was another question here about coating of do you coat the concrete in pewter? How do you do that?
No, it's actually inlaid into it. So I've actually cast I actually set this section in clay. This piece here is just set into clay, and then the concrete was poured over the top. So there's actually a sort of funnel going down into the piece. And the frog spawn piece, it's a similar again. There's all the pewter it's set into it, so the concrete pours around it. So in a way, there's many crossovers of skills with the concrete casting. It's casting, but it's casting in reverse for me, because with this I make the pattern and then make the mold, but with the concrete I'm making the mold and then pouring the concrete. It's a different way of working it.
Well, that's really fascinating, because the next question was, when you first start your drawings, how soon do you have to think about the difficulty of that it would be to make your design actually? So in effect, you've started to cover that. You've got to think about the different materials that you're using.
Yeah, especially the frog spawn piece, because the petals and the leaves and the flowers, they're actually such long stems, and the weight of the leaves, it is quite heavy. And the pewter, it's quite a soft material, as I was saying. So I've actually had to cast steel rod into those stems. So I know, and then that is cast back down into the concrete as well. So in each one of those stems on the leaves and the flowers, there's actually a steel rod running through into it, so that I know that over time, if it's too thin with pewter, it will start to just slowly bend with that sort of weight on the end of them. So it's challenges. I mean, I'd love all of that challenge of trying to work them out. And I suppose it's experience of time of working with it. You know what it's capable of as well. So you just learn like that. Yeah.
Well, there's obviously a lot of interest in the concrete thing, because you like to create a shiny surface. What's the intention behind the use of concrete? It's quite a sort of contrary in some respects, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it was. I saw some work done in concrete a few years ago, and I just thought it would be something that'd be really interesting to work with it, especially the casting, because I was casting with my pieces already. And so I actually did a concrete casting workshop for a few days at the London Sculpture School, and then just started exploring it and working with it and seeing what it was capable of, and then colouring it as well. So that added another element. I think I've always had this aspect, especially with my sculptural work, of learning new skills. So I was doing glass blowing a few years ago and combining that with the pewter. I think there's something very important about keeping developing your work, and for me, as well as my customers, as well as people looking at my work, I want there to be something new each time. 30 years, it's a long time, and to be doing it, and that's why I enjoy what I do every day. It's not work.
Well, Fleur, honestly, the comments are coming in. This has been absolutely fascinating. People say they've learned such an amount from you, and what's so lovely is that you are clearly so passionate about it, and the fact that you're sharing your skills and your knowledge with other people is so generous. So I know how much people really, really appreciate that. One final question: what's your favourite sort of form of working? Is it the big sculptural stuff? Is it the small, delicate?
I think it's probably the sculptural pieces, because I think because they're one-off as well, and like this piece, I've been working on this piece for several months now, and there's been so many different elements to it. So it's just really interesting working out the different ways that I'm going to make the pieces. And I came in one day and the first time I'd cast the concrete, and there was all fracture lines around it. So I realised the concrete was too liquid, and things like you're trying to constantly work things. So it's constantly challenging me, and learning new ways of working. Yeah.
Well, this is the point. You are the pure creative in the pewter world. So thank you so much, Fleur, for sharing your sort of ideas and thoughts with us. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to past master of the Worshipful Company, Paul Wildash, who's been involved with Pewter Live since 1991. And he's going to introduce us to our next panel of guests. So Paul, over to you.
That wasn't very clever, was it? Good evening, everybody. What a fascinating tour around Fleur's workshop. Just extraordinary. I've been studying pewter for many years, and every time I see it, I just find it fascinating. And how she does that concrete, I've no idea. Anyway, this next Zoom is... it's not quite what we anticipate to start with, but we've luckily got Steve Anwar with us tonight. It's going to be in conversation with Sarah Target, who's chairman of the PLCC, and our master, who's a cutler and a pewterer. So that will be interesting. I'll just tell you what Steve is about. Steve is an industrial designer, an artist, and the owner of Sapient Studios based in Sheffield. He likes to draw from his dual heritage, bringing together ethereal Eastern thinking and ideas with North industrial manufacturing and materials with a firm focus on handmade. The discussion will cover his sculptural artwork and the Topian collection that was specially commissioned by Wentworth. So that is Steve. Is Steve here?
Yeah, hiya.
Hello, Steve. Thanks very much for coming on. That's such short notice, but well, perhaps you'd like to get going and give us a bit of background to your work.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. Yeah, as you mentioned, really, I'm based in Sheffield. I studied at Sheffield Hallam many moons ago, industrial design back in 2001 to 2004, so a few moons ago. Kind of branched off into contemporary furniture and objects, but I was always really interested in sculptural form and one-off production rather than mass-produced. So I kind of ventured off down that kind of avenue. And then when I left university, I did a bit of traveling, got back, and then I got very severely ill. So I was bedridden for a number of years, in quite a sorry state, if I'm honest. So, you know, that kind of then makes things a bit more obvious in terms of my inspirations as a meditation teacher and Sapien Studio as well. So probably I was bedridden for about 5 years in quite a sorry state, and, you know, it took quite a long time. You know, and finally kind of managed to get back on my feet, you know, through different techniques and personal development training. Took quite a long time. It's not been an easy path. There's been many ups and many downs, but to the point where I got back on my feet, set my studio up part-time and work part-time, and to the point now where a couple of years ago I changed my name to Sapien, because I'd always kind of kept the teaching, the meditation separate to my design practice. So, yeah, I was teaching classes and I was sort of designing and working part-time. But yeah, it was weird because I always thought of them as the same thing, but for some reason was sort of separated. So yeah, a couple of years ago I decided to pivot and bring those two things together. So yeah, I'm kind of more focused now on artworks, generally mostly steel or metal, but I'm kind of interested in all different raw materials, if I'm honest. I've used pewter in the past, went with pewter. So yeah, metals is probably, I've got a bit of a penchant for metals, in particular steel, probably because of the Sheffield heritage. And now I'm kind of focusing more on sort of bringing those two worlds together. So kind of embedding artworks or sculptures with hidden meaning, spiritual messages, messages of sort of personal transformation, that kind of thing.
I mean, Steve, that was perhaps, if I can sort of step in there, it was one of the things that I found intriguing reading some of your biography. You have mentioned that your heritage has brought together Eastern thinking and Northern ideas, and that's quite a strong mix of influences. So a combination of your meditation techniques and your creative process that you now refer to as the Sapien method. Can you expand a little bit more on that? Because I think I understand it, but I'm not sure that I do.
Yeah, so I guess the Sapien method really is something that just evolved on its own. And it's nothing complex. It's very simple techniques that I've learned myself that I actually teach in classes that I've kind of brought and integrated into my creative practice. So as all artists and creatives know, is, you know, we all kind of suffer with creative blocks, and we all suffer with stress, and there's always that sort of pressure on, you know, you've got sort of bills to pay. I remember, you know, the last few years, you know, you've kind of got that voice in the background whenever you sort of sat in bliss making an artwork, and there's always that whispering of what you're doing, you need to be paying the bills, get a proper job and all. And so dealing with all that kind of stuff in the background, the pressures of society to kind of get a job and pay the bills, and while also trying to do what you love, do you know what I mean? So there's all these different pressures and stresses, and obviously getting back on my feet through illness, you know, the meditation techniques help to kind of really help me kind of recover really and get better. So it was already part and parcel of everything that I do anyway, but in a creative process, I just started kind of experimenting a bit more with the techniques. So one example of that really is, I've got different versions of this, but a fast version of it is I'll do sort of like meditation sketching or painting, which is essentially, for example, if I don't sleep at night, I don't put any lights on, I sit up in bed, I get to a couple of pens or pencils, sketch pad, have my eyes closed, and I just sit and just allow the energy to kind of escape through my hands, through the pens. And I guess that was the start of the Sapien method, kind of bringing those two things together. And then I kind of expanded a bit on that in terms of spontaneous making, intuitive making. Whenever I was stuck creatively or feeling a bit ill or not very well at the studio, I'd just literally just get some material, I'd meditate for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and then I'd sort of start doing automatic making, drawing, allowing words to just come up. and sometimes I do that for 5 minutes, other times maybe an hour, and just allow it to just unfold. And some amazing things happen when you just sort of allow that to happen. It's quite interesting what happens when it's quite free in the process. So, you know, you start to find ideas popping up and you'll be like, wow, and it kind of unblocks you. So yeah, and then you can kind of then expand on that. And so there's about 3 or 4 steps to the Sapien method. You know, you start off by meditating, then that leads into sort of a mindfulness making phase. And then you can kind of start bringing the intellect back in. So you've kind of been you've sort of been in that intuitive mind, and then you're moving more back towards the mind, and it's bringing that intuition and intellect together. You know, in our society, we're obsessed with intellect, and I think the intuition is far more ancient and far more potent, if you like. So yeah,
and some examples of that intuition Elisa has put up on the screen to show us now. I will reference your just most amazing piece that has just gone into the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, but that's in steel, and obviously we're all talking about pewter, so it would be helpful if you could tell us a bit about your collaboration with Wentworth Pewter, because again, they're quite extraordinary pieces.
Yeah, just one of the things I love doing is visiting factories. So and what part and parcel of my practice really is this idea of collaboration. It's massive. You know, I love working alongside master craftsmen, welders, fabricators, and on this occasion it was Bill. It was a master metal spinner, and I had no idea what I was going to create when they kind of invited me in. And I met Bill, and he was showing me some of the stuff that is spun before, and it's such an amazing process, metal spinning. So we kind of, I just kind of took lots of pictures, walked around for popped in a couple of times just to get a feel for the factory in Sheffield. And what stood out was all the different tooling on this. They've got these huge shelving with all these different chucks and tools. And this is kind of where the shapes came from for this collection, the Topian collection. Yeah, and then obviously I was interested in bringing brutalist architecture into it, being from Sheffield with Parkhill Flats. I was born on Kelvin Flats, which was like the little brother of Parkhill. So it's kind of embedded in my psyche, if you like, brutalism. And so, yeah, I kind of went off casting all these different blocks, and then we kind of brought the pewter together with the concrete blocks, yeah.
And am I correct? There was some element within concrete you incorporate original building materials or something of that nature?
Yeah, we were looking at ways of kind of we're putting like bits of pewter and stuff in there, and any bits to kind of help sustainability, really. Do you know what I mean? In terms of kind of helping that process. So we were just experimenting with some of the mixes with the concrete and just putting different industrial waste in there as well. We didn't really get that far in terms of that. Something we kind of parked a bit, but yeah, it was an interesting experimental process. You know, casting the different bricks using different aggregates, if you like.
And your experience of working in pewter, is that something that you think could happen again?
Oh, I mean, metals. I just love metals. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, any kind of metal really is kind of what my passion is, really. But I think I've returned to pewter. It depends on the project, really. Obviously, I'm sort of moving towards more public art and sculptures outdoors, so it kind of has to be fit for purpose. Pewter's a beautiful material, but it's really soft and malleable, so probably not the best for outdoors in terms of vandalism and people proofing, if you like.
So what sort of inspiration do you seek? Is it relating back to your Sheffield roots, a combination of factors?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I guess that sense of identity of my dad passed away recently a couple of years ago, and he came over from Pakistan back in the late 50s, and never really taught us that much about his heritage, if I'm honest. He kind of really he worked on the railway, British Rail, for many years, and he kind of integrated with the English folk. So it's almost like a bit of a mysterious part of my life. So as I've got older, I've got more and more fascinated with it. So yeah, I guess that's one of the inspirations really is, and obviously being ill and then finding meditation randomly, it almost found me while I was ill. So that then obviously branches into, you know, Eastern philosophy, Buddhism, Taoism, yoga, different forms of yoga, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's almost like it found me in a weird way when I was ill, and in a weird way, I feel fortunate going through what I went through, because it's kind of created the reality that I'm existing in right now.
And is that something that you think is, I suppose, informs your design? Because you mentioned that you brought the two elements of it together, whereas previously they have been separate. So that's a major factor for you when you're doing your design and planning things out now. Yeah,
I think so. I think as you get older, you just, you know, I'm 42 now, and I think as you get older, you get more of excuse the pun, concrete idea of who you are, I suppose, and what you love and your passions and things. It's took me a long time really, but these two aspects of making and being an artist and a designer, and also the meditation, those two big passions, I just want to bring those together more and more really moving forward. And it's something I've
You're frozen.
Cool.
Is that just Steve that's frozen?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Oh.
He'll be back.
Share the screen to show the installation that Steve did. Can you all see the screen?
Yes.
It is quite an extraordinary piece.
Isn't it? Extraordinary. Yeah. Gosh.
Do you want to say something about Sheffield, since we are talking about the city a little bit more?
Sorry, Elisa?
Do you want to say something about Sheffield? I was speaking to the master.
All right. Well, obviously, Sheffield is very much historically part of the pewter industry. It tended to be more involved with large manufacturing. Of course, the biggest product they ever made was pewter tankards by the thousand at one time. But the interesting thing is that when we were talking with Fleur was explaining about casting and the different techniques that she uses. But if you looked at the items that Steve Anwar made, they were spun. And that is a particular, you get a lot more spinning done up in Sheffield, which is obviously done on a lathe and using a chuck. And then the item is spun round the chuck. So I don't know if you have those pictures that Steve made, Elisa, but from the shape of those, they were spinning is usually round, but you can see there the all of those items would have been a piece of pewter sheet, which is then spun round a chuck, which is a former. So that's why they're all tending to be round. And that is something that particularly you see a lot of in Sheffield pewter factories. The other technique too that looks like, I can't tell whether some of these are reflections, but I noticed it on Fleur, some of Fleur's work also is where they use a hammering technique, which is also a great skill. A hammerman can start on one line of a bowl and with a flat hammer can go all the way around the bowl and come back to the initial position, and you cannot see a line where he started. And that is a another skill that you will see up here in Sheffield in the pewter manufacturing shops.
Have we got Steve back?
No, Steve back again?
Not yet, I'm afraid.
Right. Okay.
Oh,
I see him anyway.
maybe he's gone for a little rest. Just also, Master, whilst we're on the sort of the Sheffield thing, it does have such this great industrial history, and Steve has made reference to the fact that that influenced him a great deal. And things like the sculpture part, that's the piece that he's just gone in there, that's another sort of huge industrial piece. Presumably that is a big influence within the whole Sheffield area. Does that still remain?
Yeah, I mean, Sheffield these days, of course, has gone very much, a lot of the influences. What Sheffield traditionally, what has been very good at, is polishing metals. So, you know, when stainless steel came and things like that, they learned in very early to polish different metals. For instance, I don't know if most people know this, but you cannot combine, or even in a workshop, you cannot polish silver and then move on to pewter. If you do so, you have to have different mops. In our factory, if we're doing pewter, it's done in a completely different workshop to where we would be handling silver, because the pewter mops, if you use the same polishing mop, then it would attack the silver and you wouldn't be able to bring up a shiny finish in it. So the two have to be kept very separate, and that, of course, is also with regards to the different dusts and things. But now Sheffield has got the number of pewter companies and the number of silverware companies in Sheffield is greatly reduced, but the heritage of being able to polish metals remains. So I don't know whether we have anybody listening who has had a new hip or a new knee joint. Very much, we have a lot of companies who make those in Sheffield and use the polishing techniques that have been used on pewter so for many, many generations. So the skills continue in the city, just in a different format.
And the number of pewter manufacturers has reduced over the years, has it? I think there's still sort of some tradition of pewter within Sheffield.
Oh yeah, but it is the manufacturers where I think the future in pewter is much more with the craftspeople like Fleur and Gill that we'll hear from shortly. That is much more the case as against the larger manufacturers in the past that used to employ up to 50 or 100 people. That we don't have anymore.
That's hopefully where Pewter Live has come in and enthused these young students into making pewter, using pewter, which
absolutely, Paul. And I think the future for pewter in this regard is very, very bright. One of the interesting things is that Fleur mentioned also that that pewter has a much lower melting point than other metals, and this actually also allows pewter to be used in teaching for people with disabilities, because there's not the same high risk with that there is in sometimes working with other metals. So there's all sorts of advantages to pewter that we're beginning to develop now.
That's interesting you should say that, Master, because there was a school up in Sheffield that came to Pewter Live one year for children, disadvantaged children or children with disability. I can't remember what they were called, but they made some quite interesting pieces.
That's right, Paul. The name is it'll come to me in a moment. But yes, they specifically used a lot of pewter. In fact, they moved into Wentworth Pewter's old building when Wentworth moved on to a bigger building.
Yes, I remember. Yeah,
So do we have Steve back again?
Yeah, I think can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yep.
can hear you. Hooray! Welcome back.
Not sure if it's my internet or what. It's been all right all day.
Well, we've been busy talking about Sheffield, Steve, and of course, everybody who knows me from Sheffield will understand how I got away without mentioning Henderson's Relish. But you, no doubt, are a great person who knows well about this wonderful sauce that we have up in Sheffield.
Yeah, Hendo's. Yeah, you can't beat a bit of Hendo's.
Right.
So back to subject now, but you've got to know that Sheffield always wants to promote its own sauce.
Steve, can I ask you a question? Do you actually teach anybody pewter skills, students, or have you ever thought about doing that?
Yeah, maybe in the future. I'll be completely brutally honest. I'm because I'm so distractible. That's hence why the meditation helps. But and probably one of the reasons why I love it so much. I'm a bit of all rounder. I love making stuff myself, but I also love working alongside people that are absolutely brilliant at what they do, like Bill at Wentworth Pewter and different fabricators, and I just love the buzz of walking into different factories, so that combination of making things myself and working with other people, I could see myself doing maybe workshops, but I think it'd be alongside other craftsmen or other so I'm probably more of an artist designer, and like I said, crafting things. I'm not sure I'll ever be a master at one material. Like I guess traditionally artists were known for. I'm more of a kind of jumping from one thing to another, visiting people, designing, making mock-ups myself, taking them along, doing technical drawings in CAD, doing that myself, printing them off, taking them, working alongside them as well. And I just love staying there while they're doing it as well, so I can kind of watch and learn from them. And but yeah, I'm not sure I'll ever be just doing the one thing and just kind of mastering pewter or mastering steel, to be honest.
You think you might not be tolerant enough?
Pardon?
You think you might not be tolerant enough with the students?
I'll be completely honest, I'm too clumsy anyway, so I value my digits, and I think if I were to be on too many tools too often, I'm not sure I'd have many fingers left, to be honest.
Yeah.
So your design journey as such, you've mentioned that you were unwell for quite some time, and that brought you into the meditation, and then you combined the two of them together. Was design a route that you would have gone down regardless of the other things that have happened to you, or has what has occurred during your lifetime made those choices for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'd only been to university. Yes, it's been a weird journey actually. When I left school, I kind of did sign writing at Sheffield College, believe it or not, and did that for a few years, and then I went into signage manufacturing, and I guess that stayed with me. Kind of words, something that I'm kind of revisiting now in my work, using words within sculptures. But yeah, sign writing and then making large signs. I don't know if you know the dog track at Hillsborough. We made that at Beach Signs many years ago. Those with the big dogs. And so fabricating and making things has always been there, I think. And then I went off to university after that when I was sort of 21 and studied industrial design to kind of take it that extra level. So it's kind of weird how it all kind of happened. And then obviously getting ill, I was already a designer, already an artist, I think. But when you're going through a crisis like that, it brings you closer to your inner artist. I think Picasso said, everyone's born an artist. It's not that you kind of, you're almost schooled out of it, because as soon as you leave school, you've got other worries, haven't you? So we kind of lose that inner artist, that inner child. So what, I think laid there for all those years, it kind of brought me closer to that inner child, that inner artist. And it was actually a combination of the meditation and creating things in my head that saved my life, if I'm going to be brutally honest.
That amazing structure that you built, the steel structure in the park. I mean, how long did that take to make?
Oh yeah, so this is a very recent work. So that's been there maybe a couple of months. So that was early this year. We started making in February, I think. So it only took probably, believe it or not, that took myself and my fabricator Ricardo. That took about 2 weeks to make.
Good heavens! Yeah.
Just over 2 weeks. I mean, I designed all the jigs and stuff so that we made it on its back, and there was a disc in the middle, a jig that we made. So that made it much easier and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, it wasn't as complex as you would imagine because you've got right angles there.
Yeah,
that makes the structure so much easier to make in terms of the technicality of it. So yeah, it wasn't too difficult, believe it or not. It was quite heavy, moving the bits around. We actually made it into lots of smaller sections.
Right.
And then it was, when it was assembled, we assembled it into 4 quarters. And then actually, when we installed it at the sculpture park, it was in 4 quarters that kind of then, yeah, you can see one there. And then we just bolted the 4 pieces together. Yeah.
So was that.
I like the inspiration behind it. You said it was a Sufi poem called Only Breath, and that there were some alterations made to the actual wording by the person who commissioned the piece. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Cool. Yeah, so the original one was Only Breath, which is one of my favourite poems by Rumi. I'm quite big into Sufi poetry, Hafiz and Rumi. And that originally, the first design had the full poem wrapped around, as you can see there. But this is not staying at the sculpture park. So this is a private commission by a private collector in collaboration with the sculpture park. So the sculpture park put out a call out to artists last August. And I was one of the winning artists. So I put a proposal in, and then I was obviously commissioned to make it. So yeah, because it's going in their private garden in North Yorkshire, I went to visit the site. They've got their own sculpture trail in the garden, which was amazing to visit. And they just requested that we change the wording, which funny enough has actually worked out better, because Only Breath has now moved on to the next sculpture that I've just finished, which I'm not really allowed to talk about. So it's worked out really well, actually, the fact that we swapped that out.
So it's a contemplative piece as well as a decorative piece of sculpture then?
Yeah, and funny enough, if you look at the void in the centre, when I first designed this piece, I actually put a seating element inside of it. So the void in the middle is actually big enough to either fit around a tree if you had it on its back, or you can climb in it if, you know, it sort of fits around a human sort of body. So it's kind of this connection with, obviously, the Only Breath poem, you know, this kind of symbiotic relationship with trees and plants and sort of breathing. It's kind of paying homage to that sort of, you know, natural cycles of life, breathing being one of them.
How much does it weigh, Steve?
Not as much as you'd think, actually. I think it was 1/2 ton.
Oh, right. Not too bad.
Yeah, because all those panels are 3mm Corten steel, and it's, you know, predominantly it's made out of space or nothingness, as you know, to kind of revisit that theme.
How did you cut the lettering, Steve? Is it lasered?
Yeah, so we laser cut the letters out of the same panels that they sit on, just to save material, because I didn't want to kind of add more waste. So to be a bit more sustainable. As you can see that on one of those pictures there, with it in the hanging from the sky, the words are actually cut out the same panels. And then what I did is the bottom edge, rather than fully cut the bottom edge out, I designed like really thin slits across the bottom edge of the letters. So we hand folded each word up. So those words have been hand folded upwards, and then the top edge was tack welded behind.
It's fabulous, fabulous. That's really nice.
And it's interesting that you can go from creating these large sculptural pieces to something far more collectible for the normal person in the street, as it were, with the Pewter collection for Wentworths. I mean, I think, run workshops for people to where you're talking about meditation and with the art and design. Is that something that you can see as creating some sort of movement for designers for the future? Or what sort of tips could you think to give to, for example, student designers in our competition to say, these are the things that I think are important when you're considering your design?
You mean like sort of guidance or advice, do you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think just, I mean, what makes you come alive? Do you know what I mean? Being an artist, making things, designing things, that makes me come alive. Do you know what I mean? And the world's full of successful people, billionaires, millionaires, and the world doesn't need more billionaires. The world needs more people that have come alive. There's a famous quote that sort of says that. But so what are the things that make you come alive? Do you know what I mean? And if you can combine those things into one practice, then that's a winning formula, I think. And I think that, pivoting like 2 years ago, changing the name to Sapien, for me, in the 8 years before that, I've been working 10 years on my own studio, and it was so very up and down, hit and miss. And then the last 2 years, taking that risk of bringing those two things together. At first I was like, oh, how's this going to be received? We sort of doubt ourselves all the time. And another thing I've sort of learned, listening to lots of podcasts, very successful people, we all have limiting beliefs and we all have self-doubt. So it's just how you deal with that. And I think the meditation has really helped remedy my own fears, my own doubts, my own, am I good enough? Doesn't matter if you're good enough. It's just about choosing the things that make you come alive. If you can combine them in more than one form, then, write a list of things that you love doing, that you do, even if you didn't have to worry about money, what would you do with your time? Do you know what I mean? And if you can weave those things together, I think it's a magical recipe, really.
And perhaps where do you see the future taking you then? You've mentioned this project you can't talk about. We won't tell anyone if you do talk about your project that you can't tell us about. But, for the future, what would you like to see, or where would you like to see yourself go?
Yeah, it's funny. I think they're getting bigger and bigger, if I'm honest. The last, the one that you've just been showing at the Sculpture Park was the biggest piece. And then I've designed a bigger one in this. I'm part of a competition that's going to be on the TV in October. I can't really say any more than that, really, because I've signed a contract about this big. I think I've sold my whole life away, to be fair, because I've read it many times, but it was in a different language. So I was just like, yeah. Which is probably not advisable, you know what I mean? Get someone else to read it, if anyone's listening. But my excitement, I was overcome by excitement, and it was off the back of that one. I've used the name of Only Breath into the next one, which you'll see on the TV in October. And then there's another stage that I'm part of. So they just seem to be getting bigger and bigger, the pieces that I'm doing. And one of the other things that I love is nature, being out in nature. And I think that's one of the reasons why bringing art together, meditation together. But over the last 10 years, I've been a frequent visitor of Yorkshire Sculpture Park. And I think that's really influenced me as an artist designer to make larger scale, being outside in nature and coming into contact with, abstract pieces of art. For me, that's just like a dream, really. Do you know what I mean? I love being out in nature and I love art. So, being out in nature, bringing that together as well. So I think those things, for me, is something, move towards bigger pieces, really, in public.
So your career highlight probably would then be your large piece at the Sculpture Park, but obviously, the smaller pieces, for example, with Wentworth's, just give a different dimension to what you do. Yeah,
absolutely. I think I still love the idea of making smaller pieces, and I think that's something I'm going to carry on doing, absolutely, because you can control that process a lot easier and much more manageable to make. I mean, luckily I've not got any white hairs, but the last few months have been absolutely crazy, and it can be quite stressful when you're making these larger pieces. So it's not for the faint-hearted. But yeah, so I think a combination of making smaller pieces in different metals, experimenting a bit more with that, and then the highlight so far in my career is, I've got to 42 and it's finally actually starting to take off a bit properly. Do you know what I mean? So the last one at the Sculpture Park and then the one that I'm working on now, really just, it's almost like a dream come true, really.
And Sheffield will continue to be your heartland for you?
Yeah, and again, that's the interesting thing with the projects I'm working on right now, because it's, you know, this part that was part of the project as well. So yeah, you know, I've got a family in Sheffield. All my family's from Sheffield. I love it. It's the outdoor city. It's the green city. It's the steel city. Absolutely love it up here. Being, you know, so close to the Peak District. So close to so many talented fabricators and metalsmiths and craftsmen and other artists. So yeah, I think this is my own, really, in terms of making things.
I don't know if there's anybody, I think we're coming up to sort of, if anybody has any questions, because it's just such an amazing, I suppose, breadth of skills that you have there with the pieces that you design. So it's been fascinating to have a look at them. Elisa, are there any questions?
I'll just ask one, Steve. I noticed when you talked with Bill of Wentworth, you were referring, and I mentioned it while your Wi-Fi went down, but maybe you could just mention that skill Bill has. Is obviously, I would think, he's a spinner.
Yeah, absolutely. It was just, yeah, I didn't really talk through the process. I mean, you've probably done that yourself when I was dropped out of the call, but yeah, I mean, taking a flat disc and then turning it into like a tubular or bowl is just fascinating to watch. And I just kind of fell in love with the process when, I mean, I've had other things spun as well in aluminium and different metals as well. So yeah, when I met Bill and listening to Bill, he was getting paper clippings out of his drawers of famous people that have visited the factory, and you could see how proud he was. You could see the skill that he had. I think he was coming up, he was a retirement sort of age. And so yeah, the knowledge in his hands was amazing, you know. And I spent quite a bit of time with Bill, spinning different forms and watching the process. But yeah, just to transform a flat piece of metal, I just find that fascinating.
Steve, can I just ask you, as Pewter Live involves students, we have students from many colleges. What sort of advice could you pass on to young students coming out of college and wanting to get involved with, well, hopefully pewter, but maybe other metalwork activities?
Good question. I think just don't be shy. You know, visit. What you'll find is, especially in Sheffield, but I would imagine anywhere in the world, really. Every time I visit a factory, you know, I've never had anyone turn me away. You know, they're really proud of what they do. They're proud of the craft that they're making, and they'll invite you in and walk you around. You know, they'll even show you how things are made. So, I mean, that's just something I love, visiting factories. But it can be quite intimidating if you're not from that sort of world. I mean, I've worked in factories before and stuff, so I guess it was a bit easier for me. But yeah, knock on doors, talk to as many people as you can. I think if I could go back to a younger self, when I was at university, I felt quite a lot of pressure to get good grades. And if I could go back now in time, I'd probably just tell my younger self just to experiment and enjoy yourself a bit more, rather than trying to get good grades. Because, you know, if you experiment and work out some kind of process or a project that you really want to do, rather than just impress the teachers, yeah, I definitely said do more experimenting while you're still young, because you know, in 10, 15 years, when you've got kids and mortgages, you're going to not have any time to experiment, probably. Do you know what I mean? If you go down that route. So use your time wisely. If you're at college and you've got a workshop, I mean, having access to workshops, something I've tried for years, and it's very hard. You've got to work, you know, pay factories to make things. So if you've got a workshop at your college or university, make full use of it, experiment, play as much as you want, and don't be afraid of doing what the opposite to what the tutors have said. Do you know what I mean? I've always been a bit of a rebel like that, but I think really you should just be experimenting at a young age.
Do you think computer-aided design is a necessity, or do you think you can actually work without that? Do you have to be somebody who's can find his way around a computer?
Yes, it's a good question. I mean, I've I guess I've got a mixture of skill sets. I mean, it's something I use is SketchUp. So I mean, SketchUp's free, and that's my main tool. If I'm going to be honest, I'm on there, and some of the stuff you can do on there when you get better is, you know, you can pull drawings off, you can change the lines to sketchy lines, and you can create environments and stuff. But for me, I just like the combination of making things by hand, drawing things, you know, and then upping up. I'll never be an amazing sort of CAD person, to be honest with you. I'm probably very average at it compared to some people, but staring at a screen for too long is quite boring for me. So I like to have a good mix of the two things, making with my hands, sketching. I think in this day and age, yeah, computers really are a massive thing. But I think if you can nurture making things by the hand, that, you know, computers in 20 years from now are going to be designing fire, I would imagine. So you know, the hand-eye coordination of making something and feeling the material is something that a computer's never really going to be able to do for another 100 or 200 years, I would imagine.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that. Well, I think we're coming to the end, aren't we, Elisa?
Yes, we do actually have a couple of questions for Steve. So Nicole is saying that she loved the way you link the malleability and beauty of Pewter to your emotional journey. Do you think it has helped to get you to the place you are now, your emotional journey?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think I think the more meditation is, you know, one of the big teachers of meditation is you start to separate yourself from your mind. We're obsessed with labeling everything. And the more you meditate, you can see yourself labeling, this is this, this is this. And I think you can use those bad, what you'd label as bad or not very good or failures, whatever you want to label them, but you can use them as fuel. I've had a lot of failures. You know, I've worked for a lot of companies. I've been fired a few times. I've had some really big lows even before COVID kicked in, you know, financially and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think you've got to use the fuel you've got, and just keep dancing with it. Life's a dance. You just got to dance with it and do your best. That's all you can do. Sometimes that might not be anything. That's all right. That's fine. If you need a break, have a break. And I think you just listening to your own intuition, your own feelings, and letting that guide you is a really useful thing. You know, we're all obsessed with planning everything perfectly. Yes. And then when it doesn't work, it's more stressful. So you've got to have a degree of spontaneity, but also you do need some kind of structure to get you there, a plan. Yeah. But don't be rigid. Do you know what I mean? Life's a dance. Have a plan, but there's different journeys that's going to get you there. So kind of be open, you know, be open to say yes to different things or dancing with different things.
And this introduced me to another interesting question you'll be asked. That is, do you get frustrated at having to make compromises with your initial designs as a commercial product?
No, it's a really good question. I think managing your compromises in life and as a designer is a massive thing, really. Yeah, I mean, the amount of times I've been in and took my designs and then it can't be done, or you need to rejig the design. So I think being flexible, being versatile in your approach is a big thing. You know, and I think you just get better as a designer, that, you know, you start to problem solve better, I think, as a result. But you need to sort of go through that process of designing it how you want it. It might not be able to be perfectly like that, so then you've got to then go back and rejig it in a way that you're happy with, that can be made. So that's a really good question. It's something that I probably spend a lot of your time on, actually, is working how things are going to actually get made. And I guess this is where, if you're going to start visiting factories, craftsmen, speaking to other makers, that is invaluable, because it starts to really help your design process, and you'll start to figure things out. And then when you do design something and take it to someone, you'll find it's more manageable. It's less compromises.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, very much indeed. It's been a lovely talk, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And I hope that you will consider entering Pewter Live next year. I shall keep in touch with you to make sure that you... Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you very much,
guys.
So I will now return you to the studio. Always wanted to say that to Izzy, who will move us on to the next Zoom.
Brilliant, Paul. Thank you. And Steve, thank you. That was absolutely fascinating. And Sarah, again, brilliant way of asking questions and prizing more out of Steve. So thank you all. And welcome to our final session this afternoon. And I'm delighted to introduce you to one of our most popular pewter jewellery designers, Gill Clement, who is going to show you some of her work from her studio. And then again, in the last 5 minutes of the session, you will see Gill answer some questions put to her earlier and also answer any questions that you may wish to put to her via the chat box, as we've been doing earlier on. So again, if you would be kind enough to put any questions to Elisa via the chat box, and then we'll pick that up later. A little bit about Gill. She is a jewellery designer, as I've mentioned, and she works from her studio and shop in Mumbles in South Wales. She studied at Sir John Cass School of Art in the City of London from 1978 to 1982. She works with pewter for jewellery collections and for bridal pieces, through to repoussé mirrors for interiors as well. Gill's work is often cast by A.E. Williams in Birmingham, and her latest use of pewter is pleating foils and wrapping specially cut raw stones in foil, which she has embossed with old lace. She's always loved the malleability and warmth of pewter and the many different ways to use the metal, always challenging her previous ideas. So without any further ado, I'm delighted to welcome Gill and hand over to you, Gill.
Thank you. There's your big screen. Big screen. Hello, thank you. Thank you, Isabel. Well, you just made my introduction about the college I went to and everything. And I was just going to say that when I studied at John Cass School of Art, it was a very technical college. And I couldn't cope with using like big pieces of metal and the hardness of metal. And I was much more interested in using foils. And I was quite sort of rebellious in my work. And work was always of a very experimental nature. And I got sent, I think, as a bit of an experiment out to Goldsmith School of Art to do some work in fabrics. And this led to my long relationship with using foils, because I started to use metal as a fabric. And that's what got my interest going. And I started pleating, embossing and doing surface decoration. I've got some pieces here, which I hope you can see. This is my old book from college, my old sort of sketchbook full of, see, it's all ribbons and crazy designs and shells and aluminium and all foils and porcelain and pleated pewter piece. I wanted to show you these because they make sense of the work I'm doing again now, but this is back in 1982, I think it was. I made a pair of pleated earrings in my final year at college. These are actually pleated copper, but I have replicated it now in pewter, which I'll show you at the end. And this got rid of my college overdraft. I sold them to a shop called Detail that was going in Covent Garden then. I remember walking up and down there for about an hour outside with a real nervous wreck to see if anybody would buy them. And they sold loads and loads and loads of them for me. And then when Sting left his wife and started going out with Trudy Styler, and they were first photographed, she had a pair of these on. So the sales went up through the roof. And I'm very fond of these earrings. They're very sentimental. So that's the sort of start of the work I was doing. And when I left John Cass School of Art, and I got my first studio off Portobello Road, which was cheap in those days and possible. And I made my first collection in pewter. My first collection was these pieces. Which is a pewter foil, which has been wrapped around an aluminium back. They were influenced after spending a lot of time in the Museum of Mankind, which sadly doesn't exist anymore, but it was an anthropological museum in the middle of London, and it was fascinating. And there was all sort of bark paintings and things, and that was the starting point for these. And these got picked up by the Design Centre in London, which was on the Haymarket in those days. They gave out the little triangle mark, the good design, I don't know if you can see it in there. And this was made with, I think I blocked out part of the pewter with like a sellotape and then peeled away and started to blacken the background, as I remember. This last fix, this has got to be about, gosh, 40 years old now. So that's how I started selling work. And I think I had about 3 collections in the end awarded the Design Centre Triangle. This was another collection. See, in the 80s, you could get away with these enormous pieces of jewellery because artists went much more experimental, and people were making jewellery out of pipe cleaners and all kinds of stuff and bits of wood and anything. And so these are very much of their day. I was always aware of making them light enough to be able to wear, although they were huge. I was aware that I wanted them to fit onto somebody's face and to be, you know, to work when worn. And this is pewter that was painted with signwriters paints, enamel paints, Humbrol paints, anything really could get your hands on. And then the surface sanded off to give a sort of worn mosaic kind of look. Some more here. And another one there. But I used to make these pieces as sort of one-offs, and then you get the orders in from various stores around London, and I had to get into repeating then, so you had to make it's probably about 50 of each pair or 100 of each pair, and that would get quite wearing, but that was the way I've always worked. So then my first big order from America was actually for one of these collections. I think I had 3 weeks to make something like, I think it was 500 pieces of these. Oh, Rosie, the pictures. Okay. About 500 pieces of these. And yeah, they sold to America, and they sold all over. I think I sold them in Japan and sold them in New York, in Henry Bendel and I. Magnan and Sax's, places like that. I used to show at London Fashion Week and at Chelsea Crafts Fair when that was on King's Road. Total opposite ends of the spectrum, and one day be dealing with like high fashion buyers, and the next day art galleries. And I remember at an appointment in Electrum Gallery in South Molton Street, if anybody remembers that, I was told to decide between the route of fashion or art gallery. I chose fashion because it seemed much more instantly financially viable, but I didn't really see the point of labelling which camp you were in. So yeah, that's these experiments. Sorry, I'm doing it very visually. I always work in a complete mess, as you can see, but that's the way I seem to go. In the 80s and 90s, I travelled to India many times, which had a huge influence on my work. There's an exuberance of colour and decoration out there. And I travelled a lot on my own, and then I met up with 2 fashion designers, Abujani and Sandy Costa, who were just starting their journey. And the embroidery they were doing was absolutely fantastic. So we did some projects together, and I designed these when I got back, which were influenced by the Meenakari jewellery in Jaipur. And it's pewter that's been painted in blue in the middle, red around the edge, then gold leafed, then scraped through the gold leaf so the colour shows. So when they were worn and the light hit them, there was quite a lovely shimmer. Those were for Liberties. Well, you can see them there, but these were for Liberties in the 80s. Oh, there's another picture of that, the painted jewellery on a model in the 80s. And while I was in India, I got the chance to work on an interiors show there. I went back the next year to do the work, which involved making huge mirrors for Bollywood stars, and I think the Times of India bought one of mine too. And they'd never heard of pewter there. You know, pewter's not heard of. It's not used in India. Usually those kinds of people, the metal, if they had a metal mirror in their house, it would be real silver and nothing less. But they did buy the pewter and they loved it. And hopefully they've still got them hanging in their houses. I have no idea. But you can't see the picture, I'm afraid, are really bad. But this is like a painted frame. And then I painted the pewter white and rubbed gold in. Probably, I'm sorry about, you know, I don't have, oops, that's not one. Here's another one. Again, there was like a plaster I bought. I used to go around the markets and go to the local hardware shops, and I bought this stuff, which is a bit like polyfiller, and covered the wood in that and then worked the pewter. And another one here. I always used to like sand off texture, and decoration was always important to me. And I like to make the things look like quite worn. So I'd sand off the surfaces to give a sort of, I don't know, like an aged worn kind of concept to the work. So when I was in Delhi, I went to the Chandi Chowk, which is like a market in a very bustling, busy market. And I bought a lot of stones, a lot of sort of clear like little mosaic stones. And I made a collection. This is part of it. It's lost its tassel, but these stones are all from the Chandi Chowk. And there's tassels. I also bought the fabric there to make these out of. These are all repoussé pewter, all drawn on by hand. Very thin foils. I put the foil onto a rubber sheet and then draw the designs on, and then rub with pewter patina and polish up. They're all wrapped around aluminium formers so that they're light enough to wear. Because obviously jewelry at that size, if it was cast, I think it would tend just to pull your clothing. So that was the adventures in Delhi. So I loved going to India. I went there about 9 times. And I think if I have my dream come true, I'll go there again as soon as possible, because my friends now they've all retired and they've gone to live in the mountains above Goa, right out in the jungle. And at some point, they phoned me last weekend in the middle of that cyclone. They were going, come. And I'm going, yes. So hopefully at some point in my life, I will get out there again. Paisley shapes were important to me from those trips to India. This one, I ran out of the stones from the Chandi Chowk and I had to use Swarovski then. This one was done from those trips, and I sold this to the Victoria and Albert shop, the museum shop, which I was really pleased about because that's my favourite museum. And then Jean Muir got hold of my designs. So I used to go off to see her in her studios in Farringdon. Quite scary because all very quiet and very still and very sort of serious. And she'd give me a piece of fabric that was that size of a thumbnail and send me back to my studios in Rotherhithe then and say, you know, darling, come back in an hour with something. And I'd be thinking, God, I've got to get the tube back. I've got to make the thing. I've got to get back to you. Always unrealistic, but, you know, I always managed to do it. And these were pieces for her. So again, this is repoussé, all drawn by hand. This was to replicate the texture of her fabric. It was a woven, it was for a coat and it was woven. So the lines there was to replicate the material. Colour's always been important to me and obviously to her. So, you know, I think that's why she chose me to work for her. There's a few designs that's black and white. I mean, these pieces of fabric, and then you'd design something to go on there. These pieces were worn by quite powerful women back in the day, like newsreaders. You'd often see on News at 10, one of the big lady newsreaders of the day would be wearing one of my brooches. They announced something major. And I remember one once telling me that she wore it because she felt like it was like a shield, and she put it on and she felt sort of like she had a safety shield on. So I think I did the jewellery for Jean Muir for about 4 years. So after another one, this one was for her as well. I've just replicated that again. I've been in lockdown. I've gone back to quite a lot of old pieces and remade them. And this was a summer piece for her, so it had to be lighter. And I wanted the fabric to show through the perspex. This perspex was laser cut, and the pewter foil placed on there, drawn on, placed on there, and then decorated again with Swarovski stones. Unfortunately, I've just heard that Swarovski aren't going to be trading anymore. They're not selling stones now. So that's going to be that out the window when I lose my stockpiles. And that was a bit of a surprise to everybody. Here's another pair of Jean Muir ones. Again, large earrings. See, in the 80s, everybody liked shoulder pads, large pieces of jewellery, very, very statement-like. And, you know, you walked into a room with your shoulder pads and these on, and you couldn't really be missed. I've often found, actually, the jewellery does strike up conversations with people. Because in my shop in Swansea, people are always saying that they wear a piece, they travel somewhere, and somebody says, "Where did you get that from?" And just start chatting about it. But I know you can see the lines on it, but everything was always hand drawn. From that stage, I went up to A. Williams in Birmingham and worked quite closely with David Williams. And I got a job to design for Joseph Azagoria's shoemaker, their lovely shoe shop in Knightsbridge. And he wanted something that was quite solid. I haven't got any of the pieces left, or I'd show you. He wanted something that was quite solid, because obviously to wear something on a shoe, you have to be able to bend your foot and be able to walk in something without the whole thing falling apart. And it was an integral part of a sandal, and it had to be cast. So I went up to Birmingham to A. Williams, and they sorted out the problem. We worked on it together. And then I started to cast collections there. This one is repoussé drawn onto the foil. Then we backed it with milliput, and then cast the pieces directly off the foil. That was very, very statementy. My jewellery always does tend to be very, very statementy. So then from that, we started to make, I was collecting bits and pieces in junk shops, and we made pieces like this. I was getting the bits and pieces, chopping them up and changing them. And then that was cast just by directly gluing the pieces together, and then taking molds off, making the molds for that, so everything could be repeated. But this has been actually quite a mainstay of my business for a while now. I had to turn to casting because, to be honest, I wrecked my hands from doing all this work by hand. My knuckles began to go and my fingers began to go, and there's quite a lot of pain involved. And every time I'd sort of try and draw something, my hands would lock, and so casting was an important way to go, really. So that's part of that. This is a newer piece of casting. This is the original designs were drawn by hand. A friend put them on a computer. I can't do that kind of work. I have tried, but there's no chance. And these are photo etched. The originals were photo etched, and then they were cast into these shapes. And then again, I found them a little bit too perfect. So I got out the files and started to sand off the surfaces to make them look more worn. but this is about a year ago, this collection. So I've got one on too. The spirals. There's another one. A lot of my work, I do draw first. I love going around museums. I can get lost in places like museums and art galleries, or, you know, walking through the woods, picking up bits and pieces from beaches, whatever. Doing drawings and then working straight into the metal to so I've got lots and lots of sketchbooks full of designs and for these. So that's that on those pieces. I was going to show you a very quick demonstration of the bridle. Have we got time? Okay, right. These are my very latest pieces. During lockdown, I found that I've had time to rethink a lot of stuff. So I've dragged out all my old foil again, and I've been cutting out these ivy leaves. This will be part of a new collection, which we will get photographed as soon as lockdown's over and we can get up into the Welsh Hills and take photos of this. We will be doing. This one is a necklace. Or very light and ethereal and very sort of fairy-like, and an earring. So instead of being all practical and sort of thinking people can wear it for years, it can be their favorite pieces, I've gone sort of a bit mad and thinking I just want to do it for decoration and for fun and to enjoy. So basically, I've drawn around ivy leaves. I'll put this down here like this. I've drawn around ivy leaves, real ones. Cut them out. This is influenced by my favourite childhood story. This is about Lady of the Lake in Llyn Anwar in the Black Mountains, which is quite near here. And it's a story about a lady coming out of a lake, getting married. If her husband strikes her 3 times, she goes back into the lake. And I just wanted to do something that was quite sort of ethereal and quite like Lady of the Lake, quite influenced by that idea of a woman coming out of a lake and the sort of the mountains and the stillness and the quietness all around her. And there's all sorts of lovely, lovely stories to do with it, with her sort of magic cows and everything. And I just felt that was something I wanted to use in my work. So anyway, this then is drawn on. Here's one I made earlier. And I've drawn onto the pewter. I don't use this actually, I use a wooden tool, but I'm just showing you this for speed because it's in front of me. Then it's blackened with pewter patina. That's left on it for about 10 minutes and then polished off. So it's shiny, like that. Then I make a hole in the leaf. My workbench always looks like this. It's always covered in stuff. And every single week, I think I'm going to tidy it up. I'm going to sort it out. And I never, ever, ever do. So I thread the ivy leaf onto some wire. Twist. Piece of crystal. I don't usually do it as fast as this. Twist. And so on. But it's really nice to get an opportunity to make something that's, I don't know, that's quite fun and quite light and quite quite jovial, I feel. Twist. Etc., till you go all the way around. It's strong enough to wear. It could be, you know, it could easily be worn either for, well, formal wear, I guess, or for bridal. There's another one here, which is mixed in with, this is a green garnet from Mali and a carnelian and a little amethyst. And again, very, very, very pretty when on, very light and airy and delicate. And I don't know, it's just nice to work like this again. So a quick demonstration, but I think you get the feel of what's at some point when Pewter Live's on again. Hopefully I'll have lots and lots of photographs of this collection. I've also been embossing lace onto pewter foil. This is old bits of Victorian lace pushed through a rolling mill. And wrapping that around these semi-precious stones. Again, the supplies for these have dried up because the guy who supplies them to me, I think he's just got back from Brazil last week, but he's been held up in Brazil for ages. So I'm using the last of everything again, but that's going back to using foil as a textile, metal as a fabric. The pleated pieces, this is pewter. And I'm really enjoying doing this because this is challenging because this splits and I've layered it so it doesn't split. I'm not sure yet how far I'll go with this, but that's another one. But I think this is going to make, I think if this was shrunk down, that could be a really nice pair of earrings. So that's a watch this space kind of, I'm showing you all my secret work here. So yeah, so that's that. I've got some pictures of previous collections of bridal work. That's cast with David Williams. That one. This is how I got into bridal work. This girl, Kim Hook, she married James Hook, who's a very well-known Welsh rugby player, and asked me to make her wedding jewellery. And I thought, ooh, no, I can't do that. And then I started, and that was the beginning of quite a long, a long beginning with all this bridal. So there are lots and lots of women now wearing pewter for their weddings, which is, you know, it's nice. There's some gold plated here too, I think. Back jewellery. Gold. That's gold plated. And another one. So I think it's quite unusual to have pewter in wedding jewellery. I haven't really seen anybody else doing it. I don't know, you'd probably know more than me in that direction. So, but it makes people happy, so that's nice.
Jill, I have to say that's been really fascinating, and we haven't got too much time, so I've got lots of questions for you from the audience. So,
I hope it wasn't too fast. I was a bit
no, absolutely brilliant. And what was so brilliant was the sort of historical fashion journey. And I have to quickly show you, I'm really sorry to hear about the Swarovski crystals, because of course I've got some of your earrings here.
Yeah,
and the bracelet.
They're gone. That looks lovely.
I know, so I've got in the wrong place there. But anyway, so questions. First of all, well, there's a number of questions. Which what do you find is one of the best things about working with pewter for jewellery? Is there a best quality pewter? That was one question that came in.
A lot of the pewter foil I bought, actually, I bought somebody's, it was a shop in Brighton, and I just bought everything they had when they were closing down. It was called Southern Handicrafts, and I bought their whole load. And so that's the pewter I've always used. And like, this is my pewter patina. I bought everything they had of this. I've had this for 40 years, and it's still blue, and it still works. It's probably highly poisonous and not allowed to sell it anymore. But I've been buying recently. I did buy some more from the place that Fleur referred to in Birmingham.
Yeah.
He's a really, really nice guy, Chris, and he was really helpful. And I just said, can I have the thinnest foil you can possibly supply me with? So I've just had my first delivery from him, and it's perfect. So I'd go to him. Family-run company, lovely company in Birmingham.
Well, following on from that, someone's asked about how you fix the stones and if you need glue to reinforce the foil.
No, the stones are stuck on actually with a Swarovski epoxy glue, which is I used to use araldite, but if you ping araldite, it snaps, it becomes brittle. And Swarovski were making their own glue, which was very, very good. And I think you need like a hammer to get a stone off. The foil itself, it's wrapped around a base. If I show you the back, it's a sandwich. It's got aluminium. I cut the aluminium shape out first. The back is pewter, and then the front is pewter, and then it's wrapped. There's a lip where I've wrapped it around the edge. So that's how it all stays in place. And then there would be a brooch back glued to this, again with a different type of glue, with a rubber-based glue, so that when you use a brooch back, it doesn't, you don't get the vibrations through to snap it. So you have to be very, very careful on glues and really, really research what works best. So,
okay. Somebody's asked also whether you've been inspired by the antique pewter collection that we've got in the hall, the wriggle work in particular.
I do remember being in Birmingham once with David Williams showing me wiggle work and sort of getting a key out and showing me on a sketchbook, and I thought it was really, really fascinating. I've never actually, I haven't worked with that. I think a lot of my ideas just come from like drawings and museums and just seeing things and then trying to translate it into the metal. And because pewter's so soft and it's a warm metal, it's so malleable, and it's got a sort of almost like a life of its own, and you almost build up a relationship with it when you work with it, which is nice. It's a sort of, I don't know, that's the way it is.
Another question somebody's asked is, do you actually mark your pieces so that people know that it's a piece of your jewelry?
I used to, when I used to make these pieces, I used to sign them and date them. I can't with the casting because there's nowhere to sign and date. I am moving back into this foil work. I've been in business now for 40 years, and I would like to sort of revisit that thing of having time. And during lockdown, I've realized I haven't had to mess around with VAT, PAYE, running the shop, blah, 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 and I've had time to rethink a lot of stuff. So I would like to make special pieces off again and sign them, and take time over things instead of getting it out as fast as possible.
Although the bridal collection sound like that's a really, that whole bridal sort of market is amazing, isn't it? And if you're the only person doing something with pewter, done some beautiful pieces there, that must be really, really interesting.
I think it's also because I don't really follow the bridal market. I don't look at what's in fashion. They're throwing designs out left, right and centre to keep people buying the magazines. So I just do what I like doing. A girl comes in here and you just start talking. You sort of try and suss out the kind of girl she is, what the kind of thing she'd like to wear, and you work with your clients then. I did a fashion show a couple of years ago with Sue Bonham in the Old Bailey. And I took the bridal tiaras up there, and she put them with evening wear, which was really nice to see them being worn like that too. So it can be for evening wear or bridal, but you can let your imagination rip with this kind of work, and that's what I'm enjoying at the moment.
Well, that follows on to a question that's come in, and I think we'll probably wrap it up with this one, unless there are any more. Oh, wait a minute, there's a few more coming in. But is what type of piece do you most like to design?
The pieces I'm most excited about at the moment are my latest. The ivy leaf thing is really, this is really, really new. And the pleated. I will have earrings out of this, probably by the end of next week, and that would be a good challenge. So the newest pieces, yeah.
Well, let's hope that you get lots of interest, and hope you manage to sell some more of your lovely jewellery during Pewter Live. So I'm just going to say and wrap up, Gill, thank you again so much for your time. Absolutely fascinating insight to what you're doing. And
thank you very much.
Again, that you've been developing through the years, and the things that you're doing now is absolutely fascinating. So thank you so much.
Thank you for giving me the chance to go back through it all as well. So thank you.
Really lovely. And I've just had somebody come up and say they've just purchased something. So
Yay. Thank you.
So that brings us to the end of our session tonight, our live session, and we do hope you've all enjoyed the first day of Pewter Live, and we hope you'll all join us again tomorrow, same time, same place, so with a different set of people to talk to. So thank you all very much indeed. Thank you to all the presenters, and good night. See you tomorrow.
Thank you. Bye.
Good night. Thank you.